Thumbelina, illustrated by Pamela Storey. Contents. The story begins. Thumbelina in winter. Thumbelina and the swallow, queen of the flowers. The story begins. There was once a lady who wanted a child so badly, she decided to ask a kind old witch for help. "Plant this barley corn seed in a flower pot," said the witch, "and you shall see what you shall see." Well, the woman went home and planted the seed. All at once there grew the loveliest flower she had ever seen. It was rather like a tulip, with its red and yellow petals tightly closed. But when the woman brushed her lips against the leaves, they opened out with a gentle pop. And there, in the middle, sat a pretty little girl, only half as long as the woman's thumb. "I'll call you Thumbelina," cried the woman, overjoyed at having a child at last. Half a walnut shell was trimmed and polished to make the prettiest little cradle for Thumbelina, with violet petals for a mattress and a rose petal to keep her warm. During the day, the woman set a garland of flowers floating in a dish of water, which was always kept on the table. With 2 horsehairs to use as oars and a tulip leaf for a boat, Thumbelina would row from one side to the other, singing sweetly the whole time. Then one night, as Thumbelina slept in her walnut shell cradle, a mother toad passed by the window. One pane was broken, so she hopped into the room and onto the table. "My," thought the toad, "what a lovely wife she'd make for my son." Next minute, Mother Toad had picked up the shell cradled with Thumbelina still inside and hopped back out into the garden. It didn't take Mother Toad long to reach her home at the edge of a brook. And when her great, fat, ugly son saw pretty little Thumbelina still fast asleep in her walnut shell, he croaked with joy. "Break, break, geek!" "Shh, you'll wake her," warned his mother. "Look, let's put her on one of the water lily leaves, the biggest one that's furthest away from the bank. Then she can't get away." Thumbelina woke early next day. At first, she did not know where she was. Then she sat up on the water lily leaf and saw the water all around her, with no way of reaching dry land. Poor Thumbelina, when she learned that she was to be the wife of a great, fat, ugly toad, she cried bitterly. She hardly cared when he and his mother took her walnut shell bed away, ready to put it in their marshland home. But Thumbelina already had some good friends. The little fish who swam in the brook had seen the great, fat, ugly toad. They did not think it was right that Thumbelina should marry him, so they nibbled at the stem of the water lily leaf on which she sat. Before long, Thumbelina found herself floating down the stream, far, far away from the mother toad and her great, fat, ugly son. Thumbelina in winter. Thumbelina sailed a long way on her water lily leaf, through big cities and past small villages, woods and fields. "What a lovely little girl!" cried the birds. "How pretty she is!" Then one day a big cockchafer beetle saw Thumbelina. In a flash, he took her up into a tree and set her on the biggest green leaf he could find. "Well," said the cockchafer, looking at Thumbelina, "she's very pretty, but not a bit like any cockchafer I've seen." All the other cockchafers who came to see Thumbelina soon agreed. "Why," said one, "she has only 2 legs and no feelers at all," another pointed out. "Just see her slim waist," cried a lady cockchafer. "Ugh, just like a human's. How ugly she is," added another. At first, the cockchafer who had captured Thumbelina still thought she was very pretty, but the more the others found fault with her, the more he began to believe she was ugly. In the end, the cockchafer flew down from the tree with Thumbelina and left her on a daisy, quite alone. Thumbelina managed to gather some blades of grass and weave herself a little bed, which she hung beneath a clover leaf for shelter. All through the summer and the autumn, she ate honey from the flowers and drank dew from the leaves, with the birds to keep her company. Then came the long, cold winter. All the birds flew away, the trees shed their leaves, and the flowers died, so Thumbelina had no clothes or blankets. The clover leaf which had been her shelter soon shriveled up. Then it began to snow, and every snowflake which fell on Thumbelina felt like a whole spadeful because she was so tiny. Thumbelina knew she would soon be buried if she kept still, and so, shivering the whole time, she trudged through the big cornfield, now cold and bare. But near to the ground was the home of a kind old field mouse, and when she saw Thumbelina looking so cold and so hungry, she held up her paws in horror. "You poor little thing," she said, "come into my warm room and have something to eat." Very soon, Thumbelina and the field mouse had become good friends. "You can stay with me for the winter," said the field mouse. "Just keep my room clean and tell me stories." So that is what Thumbelina did. The field mouse often had a visit from a big black mole in a velvety coat. She was always telling Thumbelina how rich he was. Mole had already dug a tunnel leading from the home of the field mouse to his own splendid house so that they could go and see him. In the tunnel there lay a swallow, so still that it seemed he was dead. Field mouse and mole hardly looked at him, but Thumbelina felt very sorry for the bird. So that night, when the field mouse was asleep, she crept out of bed and wove a little rug from straw. Somehow she dragged it through the tunnel and laid it over the poor swallow. "Farewell, pretty bird," she cried, kissing its little face, "and thank you for your beautiful song in the summertime." But the swallow was not dead. In the autumn, when all the other swallows had flown away to the warm countries, he had torn his wing on a thorn bush and been left behind. It had become so cold that he had fallen down, laying quite still for a long time. But now that he had been warmed, he fluttered his wings and opened his eyes, looking at Thumbelina. "Thank you, pretty little child," said the bird. "Soon I shall get back my strength and be able to fly about in the warm sunshine." Thumbelina and the Swallow. Thumbelina felt very lonely. Every morning at sunrise and every evening at sunset, she would creep out, waiting for the wind to blow the corn apart so that she could see the sky. Then she would think of the swallow, wishing she could see him again. "Mr. Mole wants to marry you," said the field mouse one evening. "Aren't you lucky?" Thumbelina did not feel lucky. The thought of living deep under the earth where she would never see the sun made her weep bitter tears. "Goodbye, bright sun," she cried, stretching out her tiny arms toward it. "Goodbye," she cried to a red poppy in the cornfield, putting her tiny arms around its thin stem. "Say hello to the little swallow if you see him again." Thumbelina heard a tiny voice just above her head. It was the swallow, and how glad he was to see Thumbelina. As for Thumbelina, she could hardly stop crying all the time she was telling him about the mole and how she was going to have to live beneath the ground where the sun never shone. The swallow felt so sorry for her. "Now that the cold weather is coming again," he said, "I am going to fly far away to the warm countries. Will you come with me?" "Sit on my back," the swallow went on. "We'll go far away to a place where the sun shines and where it is always summer." "Yes!" cried Thumbelina joyfully. "Yes, I will go with you." She set herself on the bird's back, tying her belt to one of its strongest feathers. Then the swallow flew up into the air above forests and seas, high over the mountains. At last they came to a place where the sun shone more brightly than Thumbelina had ever seen before. Beautiful flowers and the most delicious smelling fruits grew everywhere. Amid green fields and meadows, happy children ran about laughing and playing, with butterflies of all colors fluttering around. And the more the swallow flew, so everywhere seemed to become even more beautiful. Suddenly, a wonderful sight caught Thumbelina's eye. She looked ahead to see the sun glinting on a magnificent palace of white marble, with green vines creeping up the tall pillars. "That is my winter home," said the swallow. Queen of the flowers. The swallow flew lower so that Thumbelina could see better. "Choose a flower," he said, "and I shall put you on it. Then you shall have everything as perfect as you could wish." Thumbelina did not know what the swallow meant by this, but she had already seen some lovely white flowers growing between the pieces of a broken marble pillar which lay on the ground. So the swallow flew down with Thumbelina and set her on one of the leaves. It was then she had the biggest surprise of all. In the middle of the flower sat a handsome little prince with a golden crown on his head and silver wings at his back. At first, the prince was frightened of the swallow because he was so small, no bigger than Thumbelina. It seemed like a giant bird to him. But when the little prince saw Thumbelina, he quite forgot to be frightened any longer. In fact, he thought she was the prettiest, most beautiful creature he had ever seen. So pretty that he took off his golden crown and placed it on her head. "Will you be my wife?" he asked Thumbelina. "Then you will be queen of all the flowers." Of course, the handsome little prince was quite different to the great, fat, ugly toad and the black mole who lived beneath the ground, where the sun never shone. So Thumbelina said yes at once, and out of each flower there came a tiny little lady or a tiny little lord, each of them bowing to Thumbelina and their new king. Each lord and each lady brought Thumbelina a wedding present. The one she liked best was a pair of silver wings. The king fastened these to her back so that she could fly from flower to flower, just like he did. And as the flower kingdom celebrated the wedding of their king and Thumbelina, their new queen, the little swallow sat on a tree above them, singing specially for them. He sang sweetly enough, but his heart was sad. All too soon, he knew it would be time to return to the land of the toad, the field mouse, and the mole, until autumn came and he could fly back to see Thumbelina once more.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe.